Welcome to the second week tackling the Paul's letter to the church at Rome. And as we begin exploring it, we're going to deal with the first 17 verses of chapter 1 this week. And let's remind ourselves of the big picture. The library, the Christian library, includes 27 books, and the sequence is important. For after the first four narratives of the life of Jesus, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, then we have Acts. And Acts is the story of the early Christian movement. The first half of the book of Acts really emphasizes the leadership of Peter. The last half of the book of Acts emphasizes the leadership and ministry of Paul. And so the very next book after Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts is Romans. And Romans is because from the earliest decades and centuries of the Christian movement, this book has been the foundation document for Christian doctrine and teaching. This letter was written in approximately 60 AD. Paul's first letter to the churches, 1 Thessalonians, was written 50 AD. So interestingly, 1 Thessalonians is placed last, and Romans, the last book written, was placed first. And it's first because it really reflects where Paul came to in his journey, and therefore it's a foundation, a place to begin in exploring the meaning of the gospel according to Jesus. Now, as we explore these first 17 verses, it's important to point out the clarity that Paul has in these first 17 verses. He really puts forth some basic understandings that are important for us to take a look at this week. Verse 1, Paul, a servant of Jesus Christ. He describes himself as a servant. Now, this is interesting because he was a Jew. He could have introduced himself as being a chosen one. That would have been natural and easy, but he didn't. Because over these 10 years, he grew to a self-understanding that he was called to be a servant. Period. Instead, his self-understanding of servanthood, and this stood in the tradition of the Hebrew preachers, the prophets that we've looked at from time to time. The prophet Isaiah coined the understanding of the suffering servant for the nation Israel and for the Messiah. And indeed, Jesus' self-understanding was a servant. And so Paul, first of all, introduces himself as a servant. But then verse 1 continues with another power-packed understanding. And he said he's called to be an apostle. Well, apostle means to be sent. So the Acts of the Apostles are the Acts of the sent ones of the early church. And after Paul had his come to Jesus event on the road to Damascus, he became a part of the early Christian community, and the community sent him to Asia Minor, to the countries throughout the Mediterranean region. The community sent Paul to tell the story of Jesus primarily to those who were not Jewish. Paul was willing to be sent. He was a person with a powerful story of grace, replacing law as the governing principle of his life, and he was sent to tell his story. So verse 1 just establishes Paul as a servant, and as a sent one. But then we jump to verse 7, and it's another important definition, for he says, to all God's blessed, beloved in Rome, who are called to be saints. Sainthood is an interesting history to it. Oftentimes saints are understood as persons who are, quote, without sin, which no one is, but some purport to be, or at least those in whose life sin is far less frequent than ordinary disciples. Saints are those who somehow in their exemplary ways have excelled in their faithfulness. So those of us in central Kansas know the story of the efforts of Father Capon in Wichita, who is being considered by the Pope and the Vatican to be named a saint because of his exemplary ways of faithfulness. However, the basic definition of saint, as we have it in Romans, is one who is set apart. It's that simple. Not set above, but set apart. Not better than, but different from others. Now, set apart for Paul had to do with the way one lives in agape love. In the early Christian movement, disciples were set apart in their communities, Ephesus or Thessalonica or Corinth, wherever they lived. They were set apart in their communities because they lived a life expressive of their grace-filled lives of love. Paul was different after his experience on the road to Damascus because all of a sudden he became a person that expressed that love. The early Christians were called to be set apart as saints, those who were different because they expressed love to all. Then we go and jump to verse 9, which is another power-packed verse. For it reads, for God, whom I serve with my spirit by announcing the gospel of his Son, is my witness that without ceasing I pray for you. Without ceasing. Now, that's interesting, because 10 years earlier, when he wrote the book to Thessalonica, to the Thessalonians, he coined the phrase to the Thessalonians, pray without ceasing. Now, so 10 years later, he uses the same understanding as he says to those in Rome, I pray for you without ceasing. What does that mean? Well, prayer is both an act and an attitude. We know what the act of prayer is. We all engage in that. As we're gathered as a community, we pray the Lord's Prayer together, the prayer that Jesus taught us to pray, saying, and that's an act. But what Paul is getting to here is that prayer is also an attitude. That without ceasing, he has an attitude about those in Rome, thankful for their witness. For praying without ceasing is having the attitude of thankfulness that in every circumstance, Christians are called to be thankful. Paul was thankful without ceasing for the witness of the church in Rome. Then we jump to verse 12. And verse 12 says, or rather, so that we may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith, mine and yours. A foundational principle in the early Christian community, that which is mutual encouragement. This is a mustard seed that Paul planted, which Martin Luther articulated in his understanding of the priesthood of all believers. Any person can be a priest to another person, and we're called to have priests, other persons in our lives, and also to be priests to others. And for Martin Luther to say that as a Roman Catholic, a priest in the church, and the church's teaching was you must be dependent upon a priest to hear your confession. You see what the concept of mutual encouragement meant to Luther as he sprung out of that Roman Catholic tradition and started the Protestant movement. Mutual encouragement. I have a cherished gift, a carving given to me when I left the Dallas area in '96. It was a carving of Barnabas. And the only thing we know about Barnabas in the New Testament was that he's referred to as the son of encouragement. The pastor who made that carving of Barnabas and gave it to me just simply said that he had experienced that with me and him and our relationship with each other of being mutually encouraging. And he was really encouraging to me. And I discovered in the gift that I'd been encouraging to him. Indeed, not only Martin Luther took this phrase and ran with it, but John Wesley took this phrase and ran with it as he exercised in the early class meetings of 12 to 15 people in the Methodist movement. They were mutually encouraging with each other. Finally, we want to look at verse 17. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed through faith, for faith, as it is written, the one who is righteous will live by faith. Persons of faith experience the righteousness of God. They express this righteousness in their behavior and witness with others. And this invites us into the very heart of Paul's thought. Righteousness is not created by our good works. Nope. Righteousness is a gift of God to us, discovered in faith. And once discovered, it's expressed in good works. See, Paul knew that his good works didn't qualify him for anything because he was cruel in his attitude and his behavior towards their early upstart Christians. But you know something? On that road to Damascus, he discovered love that transformed his life. That was the righteousness of God, a gift to Paul. And once discovered by Paul, then it's expressed in good works. Good works are the consequence of God's righteousness, not an act to earn God's righteousness. But as simply as I can, these first 17 verses, we discover why the book of Romans became the foundation for Christian learning in the first century and continues today? This raises a lot of good questions, but following are three that might guide your thought and prepare for a conversation that some of us will have in church school next Sunday. First of all, what are the occasions at Grace United Methodist Church when we experience being sent to serve in our life together? Indeed, another way of asking, what are the occasions in Grace United Methodist Church when we experience being sent to serve? Or is our life together determined by how we choose to serve? Secondly, what are the characteristics of sainthood in Winfield today? Those who are set apart, different, because of the way they live their faith. Finally, what are the experiences of mutual encouragement in our own journey of faith? I'm looking forward to our conversation together. Thanks for listening.